I believe, because I don't know of any other conversation that's done this before, which is talking about coming out, but not necessarily just in the sexual orientation way, but also coming out in terms of sight loss. And I think both of those conversations have been had individually, but they've never been had intertwined. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the similarities, the differences, the intricacies, and the damn right awfulness sometimes of coming out. And we're going to look at it from both perspectives. So we have Dan and George here. They're going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to have this conversation. Stay around. You're going to probably learn something. So let's start with introducing people. Dan, say hi and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Williams, Director of Visualize Training and Consultancy. And I'm delighted to be speaking to George today about his coming out journey, and also talking about my coming out journey, because we both got slightly different coming out journeys. And I think it's going to be very interesting, as Graham alluded to.
George, say hi.
Perfect. Hi, my name's George. I haven't really got a lot to say in terms of kind of where I am at the moment. I'm in a massive kind of career change after kind of recently kind of coming to terms with my sight loss. So have the opportunity to kind of have these conversations is great, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, let's start from at the beginning. Dan, tell me a little bit about what it was like for you when you first discovered that your eyes were beginning to let you down.
So I discovered my eyes were rubbish at the age of 8, and I was a clumsy child, and everyone just thought, he's just a clumsy child, and I would drop things on the floor. I wouldn't be able to find things. I kept going back and forward to opticians, and finally got a diagnosis when I was about 10, I would say. And they diagnosed a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which is basically at the back of the eye, the cells slowly die off. And I went through mainstream education, and I had difficulties dealing with that, in that when I was at school, the teachers wanted me to sit at the front of the class. Some other kids in the classroom would take the mickey, and they would say things like, "You blind bat, how many fingers am I holding up?" This type of thing. So I would say I was tormented at school quite a lot, but I think also that made me quite resilient as an adult, because I think I don't take much rubbish from people nowadays because of my experience. So whilst those people who were bullies at the time thought that they were intimidating me, as I've got older, it was actually a strength. So I've looked at that as turning that negative into a positive, really, because I think it's given me a big resilience in my own sort of personality. When I was about 16, all my friends started driving and looking at their careers and these type of things, and I just didn't know what life was going to be like for me, and at the time I felt I was a poor little blind person that didn't know what to do, where to go, who, and I was quite low in my mood. When I was at school, I hid it from everybody else. I didn't want anyone else to know that I had a visual impairment, but I would have like a specialist laptop, and I did have magnification software on my computer. But I would just bumble on and try and hide the fact that I couldn't see. I would ask my friend in the class, what's been written on the board, and sometimes he would have to write things down for me or just tell me what's on the board. And I just tried to fit into that normal sort of situation, in inverted commas, because that was what I felt was normal. And I think part of that was because I'd had to deal with adversity in terms of bullies, and I didn't feel comfortable to be myself and to admit to the world that I couldn't see very well. So when I realized all of this, I got quite down and depressed, and I felt suicidal, and I went through a whole chain of emotions, mental health, and I had sort of counseling and therapy around all of this. And then somebody told me about this amazing place called the Royal National College for the Blind in Hereford, and I went there and I saw loads of blind people. And that was the beginning of my coming out journey, where I met loads of blind people, and I was like, but what are they going to go and do? And I just thought, you know, my only blind person I'd ever known of was probably Stevie Wonder or David Blunkett. And I didn't know anyone else in the public eye. And I met all these blind people, and I was like, oh my God, is this going to be my life? And you know what? That was the turning point for me. And that was my sort of coming out experience, because I met inspirational people. They were going on to be massage therapists, lawyers, and they were all studying. And I thought, yes, I can do these things, and I can do whatever. I can do whatever I want to do. And that was the turning point for me, where I was like, wow, you know, I can do anything. And then I went on to university and went on then to set up my own business. And from there, things have just spiraled. So yeah, I'll sort of stop there, and then I'll tell you a bit more later on.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling that. It'll be interesting as we're discussing this, to talk a little bit about, do you feel like you could feel things changing in terms of kind of acceptance and inclusion and whatever as you were getting older? Because without giving away your age, sir, but it clearly, at the point where you were 8, I think we were still a long way away from where we are now in terms of accessibility and inclusion, and you know, having things in place. And that has changed a lot since then. So it's almost like, as you came of age and got older, the society's ideas and acceptance and you know, reasonable adjustments and things like that have all been changing behind you or with you in step, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree to a point. I think definitely we've come far with inclusion. But I think it's a massive psychological change. So regardless of how far we've come, in my head, I didn't want to accept using a guide dog, a cane. I didn't want anybody to know my secret, because I felt that people would judge me differently. And I think it's, you know, I probably only about 7 years ago maybe 10 years ago, was where I really accepted my visual impairment and really embraced it and sort of what I would call owning it. And that took a big, you know, it's a massive psychological process, because it's like when you lose somebody, you go through grief, you go through loss. And I always say you can't get to acceptance unless you've had some type of therapy or met other people that are going through a similar experience, and learned from others, because at that time you feel so alone that you're the only person in that situation. So yeah, I think it's definitely about mindset and trying to change that mindset, but you can't do that unless you've got that support, I would say, to help you do that.
Let's hear George's story. And George, you probably will want to comment as well on Dan's story as you tell yours.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of, Dan's made loads of points that I can kind of resonate with, in terms of kind of coming to terms with sight loss and kind of having those kind of sight loss journeys. I would say that Dan's kind of story is quite very different to mine, in kind of a variety of different ways, which I'll go into. But kind of, yeah, I kind of, as a child, I didn't really know much about retinitis pigmentosa. I've got retinitis pigmentosa as well, the same as Dan. But I didn't really know much about it. I just knew that my eyes weren't very good, and I was clumsy, and I couldn't see very well in the dark, and I've always wore glasses. But other than that, I kind of lived very kind of, the phrase normal life. So going to school was very normal for me, well, apart from the being clumsy part, but kind of went through my whole education knowing that the back of my mind that this kind of eye condition was there, and there was like elements of those kind of symptoms of night blindness and my peripheral vision deteriorating. That was always there, but I always pushed it away and pushed it to the back of my mind, kind of like buried my head in the sand with it. And then I kind of went through university and I started to realize, oh gosh, I can really start to struggle, like going out with friends and stuff and not telling people this massive secret that I had, that I'd seen it as a secret, and kind of going night clubbing and not being able to see, and then just putting it down to being drunk because that's kind of what I did. Or, George, what are you doing? And I was like, oh God, I'm really drunk. I can't see what I'm doing. And just kind of putting it down to that, always making excuses for myself because I didn't want people to know. And then kind of after university, I kind of wanted to go into the world of teaching. So again, I didn't really think that employers would appreciate, or even parents would appreciate, somebody who can't see very well teaching children. And I thought, oh, I can't tell anybody about it now. And meanwhile, my eyesight was still getting worse and worse. So I still, bury my head under the sand to keep plowing through. And then it got to, I would say, very recently, last year, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is like, it's becoming a problem now for me, and the fact that it's affecting kind of not only my day-to-day life, but also kind of at home. And I was thinking, oh God, I'm struggling in terms of mentally thinking about the potential that I have to go out and walk to work on my own. Like I started to find it really stressful. And then I thought, you know what, I actually can't go on like this. It's not sustainable. So then I made that decision to kind of first of all, step away from my role as a teacher. And then I had like a few months just to kind of mentalize for myself and think about what my next avenue is going to be, because at that point I knew nothing about kind of the resources and services and support that's out there. I automatically assumed that when I was going to leave teaching, or when I wasn't able to teach anymore, that would be it. That's my career over. I'm going to be stuck in the house. I'm not going to be able to leave. I'm not going to be able to see. I'm not going to be able to do anything. And I thought my life was basically over. But it wasn't until...
Can I pick up there?
Yeah, of course.
And I was just going to say that what George is saying is also mentally exhausting. So when you're sort of pretending to be something else or someone else, and pretending to try and fit in and pretending not to struggle in front of friends and family, that is mentally exhausting. And a lot of people do that on a daily basis because they don't want to stand out. They don't want to be different. And, I think it's to recognize that that also has an impact on people's mental health with anxiety and stress, and this type of thing. So it's just to make people aware of that as well, so the listeners really.
Yeah, and having to go through your every single day, literally going through your day-to-day life, having all of this in your mind and having to mentally go through all of that, as well as do your normal day-to-day tasks. But a normal-sighted person would never even consider having to think about tiny little things about how many steps there are, but not making a fool of yourself, or having to kind of figure out where the light switch is in a room, or just loads of little things that normal-sighted people would never take into consideration. That as someone who's trying to hide their sight loss, it's just made it very, very mentally draining.
We also mentioned right at the start that we're going to also talk about coming out in terms of sexual orientation, etc. And for both of you, when was there a realization there that I'm at an age where actually I fancy men? And were you trying to push that away at the same time? And actually, what are the similarities? I can imagine that there must have been a point where you were trying to hide a lot.
Yeah. So I'll pick that up. So for me, again, I sort of always knew that I fancied men and I was gay. But again, I was scared to tell anybody else because of stigma, because of how would other people perceive me. Would I still have friends? Would people still like me? Would I still fit in? All of these type of things. And, you know, would somebody fancy me? Would somebody want to go out with a blind person? Like loads and loads was going through my mind. And again, that it was mentally exhausting. So you've got it on both sides. So you're dealing with the sexuality, you're dealing with the visual impairment. And I think partly, you know, when I had my sort of mental health breakdown when I was about 17, that was partly it as well as well as my vision. But I would say the vision was sort of stronger. But yeah, I would say there's loads of comparisons in that really, because it's more about how society perceives you, I would say, in both aspects. And it was that scared to admit to the world. But again, now I just own it, and it doesn't faze me, because if it's somebody's issue, then that's their issue, not mine. And that's how I've sort of dealt with it moving forward. And so yeah.
George, do you want to pick
I think you kind of knocked the nail on the head there, Dan, just in terms of kind of the way, for me, is it's something that I suppressed for years and years. And I always said to myself that, am I gay? Am I not? I was very confused. And then going through university, I was still very confused. And then it's those people having those prejudgments and those stigmas and those stereotypes that people have of, say, gay people and blind people. It's just like you were saying, or who's going to want to go out with a blind person? Like, I've got all of this to come in the future. I'm suppressing not only my sexuality, but also the fact that I've got a sight condition. And they're very similar in the fact that mentally they kind of both played the same role, I think, for me. And I think that I always said to myself, I would only ever come out when I met the right person, because I knew deep down that I would need that support in coming out as gay. But visually impaired, again, that took even longer. So I came out when I was in my early 20s. And then nearly 10 years later, it's taken me another 10 years on top of that to even think about starting to talk about my sight loss.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, like, I think my partner's only with me for the blue badge and the concessions at the cinema and the theatre. Do you know what I mean? And I thought when I got with my partner, I thought that, you know, I had I suppose my own outlook was quite negative of the world, in that I thought, you know, who would want to go out with me? But then I also think, no, do you know what? I've got a lot to bring to a relationship as well. It might be that I can't see, but I'm still good at lots of other things. And I think it's about having that self-confidence within yourself, because you've got to love yourself before somebody can love you. And I think that's the same in any relationship. But I think, you know, in relationships, in the world, in any relationship, people go through trauma. You know, people might have cancer, or they might have another MS or another condition. And in a relationship, you just got to deal with that, you know. And if your partners can't deal with that, then you got to question, is that somebody that you want to be with? Do you know what I mean? So for me, I dated a lot of people, and some people could deal with it and some people couldn't. And the people that couldn't deal with it, that's their issue, not mine again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's about putting everything into perspective. And there's always that saying, isn't there? There's always somebody out there for you. And I think that goes for any relationship.
Exactly. And like you said, with like confidence, it's about, like, no one can love you before you love yourself. And for me, that was massive. And it's just about changing your mindset and just having that positive attitude, because without that, that's not going to be attractive for anybody, regardless of whether you can see or not, or whether you're straight or gay. It's irrelevant. Having that self-love is so important for yourself. And in order for other people to love you, you need to kind of come to terms with who you are and be comfortable with who you are, because otherwise you're not going to end up meeting anybody. You're not going to end up having a satisfying, happy life, because you're too worked up about your own insecurities. And you have to kind of just put them all out on the table and think about, yeah, this is who I am. These are the cards I've been dealt with. It's not like I chose to be gay, but I am, and that's the way it is. And if you don't like it, like you said, Dan, it's your problem, not mine.
You would be prime candidates to appear on a TV program that had something to do with dating, and it's become much more inclusive. We'll see people on there that have a visual impairment. We'll see people on there of different sexual orientations, whatever, right? Society has kind of opened the door and said, oh, you know, it's okay to be this now, or it's okay to be that. And actually we're happy to see people who are different from us. But is there actually the support for those people, that emotional support, you know, day-to-day support for those people that actually helps those people? Or in a way, have we, you know, by publicly making public displays of showing difference, have we kind of almost felt, oh, we're there, but we're not, if you know what I mean by that?
I know what you're saying in terms of, it's really hard because obviously people that are, I don't know, of a different sexual orientation or have a disability, yes, okay, it's very important for everybody to kind of be equals within society. But like you're saying, in terms of the support that's there, I would say it's not there, well, just from personal experience anyway, because looking from what you were saying in terms of going onto a TV show, for example, into a dating show, if I were to watch, say, First Dates, and then a blind person goes on there, the first thing I'm going to think is, oh, that person's blind. I've already made that judgment of somebody, or I've already got that preconception of somebody because of their disability. The same way as if they're gay, I'd be like, oh, that's a gay couple. But whereas if it was a straight couple going on there, I would never think, oh, that's a straight couple, or they haven't got a disability. You always have those kind of, you always notice those things, that was one of my big issues, was why I never wanted to really come out, or why I probably suppressed it, was because I didn't want people to have those first impressions and those first views of me would be that, oh, he's gay or he's got a disability.
Yeah, that's what I mean, really. It's almost like, oh, look, it's cool, they're different.
Yeah. And and it's interesting because when I'm using my cane or I'm using my guide dog, I find you get a lot more people that look and stare. And I think, you know, it's a natural thing to do, look and stare, because that's what society does. But from my perspective, it makes me feel conscious and hypersensitive that I'm just being stared at when I've just walked in a restaurant to eat a meal, like everybody else is in there to eat a meal. And sometimes I think, oh, why don't you just mind your own business? Why do you feel that you need to look at me because I've got this sexy cane in my hand? Do you know what I mean? And sometimes I just think it just really annoys me. It's one of my gripes, I just think, of society. But if I wasn't using that cane, probably people wouldn't stare at me. So I find that quite interesting as a society, how that works. And also back to the TV point, I think TV, you know, they hype up the fact that person is blind. So it's not just, oh, it's Dan, he's looking for a man. It's Dan, he's blind, he's looking for a man. So if you're
look at us, we're ticking a box.
Yeah. So if you're hyping it up and making it a big thing, then it becomes a big thing. If you just make it business as usual, then it doesn't become a big thing. And I think, you know, the media are very good at doing that type of thing, even with news stories. You know, blind man mugged in the street. Well, it's just a man that was mugged in the street, you know. So it's things like that where you think, is it necessary? Do we need to emphasize the point that the person has a disability or not? And they do it with everything, any equality spectrum. It's, you know, a race is done, gender is done, everything. And you think, is that necessary?
And you can't necessarily blame the program makers or the media or whatever, because actually they're feeding into, or you could, but they're feeding into what society wants in a way. So it's a two-way street, because ultimately we want it as consumers and we buy into it as well. It's almost like I just feel like we're trying to say that it's okay as a society, and therefore we like it when we see these things, because we can sit there and say it's not so much that the program makers tick the box, it's that we as viewers can tick a box, right? it's like, you know, when I was young, you know, and we sat around and you first talked about sort of soap operas. Soap operas became really, really popular on the TV when I was a kid. And, you know, the conversations around, oh, do you watch soap operas at school and with teachers and stuff would always be around, well, it's really useful because it's people seeing kind of an exaggerated form of their own existence and being able to kind of escape into that. And I do kind of wonder whether that's where we're at in society now, which is that we watch these things on TV or we read these things in the press, etc., and we're all sitting there going, yeah, haven't we done well?
Yeah.
Haven't we done well? Look how far we've come.
I think
You know?
I think that if it was like that, say 15 years ago, then maybe I wouldn't have felt so kind of, I don't want to say it, but ashamed of being gay or ashamed of being visually impaired or embarrassed almost. Maybe if it was like it is now, like you said, there's always like they're just kind of normalizing it, aren't they, for gay people to be on the TV or for people with disabilities to be on the TV. But if it was like that 15, 20 years ago, then maybe I wouldn't have felt so kind of negative about it all. You don't really know, but I understand what you were saying, Graham, about it being a two-way street, because yeah, of course, people that are gay or have a disability, yeah, you want that acceptance, you want it to be out there, you want it to be normalized, but then where's the middle in terms of the other way, where I would be like, oh yeah, but I don't want to be prejudged, or I don't want people to have these preconceptions of me. But then it's about having that middle balance that's really hard, because you can't have it always, but then I don't know.
I think also it's interesting because whilst you say it's, you know, can't blame the media, I would disagree and say we can blame the media to a point, because I think it's about the portrayal. So if we portray something in a positive way, then people think, oh, they can do this, this, and this. So, for example, where are blind people on the soap operas that you mentioned in a positive light, using their assistive technology, you know, going to work every day? I think that disabled people are generally portrayed as quite unable to do things, or they don't generally have a role where they're going to work and business as usual again, you know, in some of these soap operas as well. So I think TV can do a lot, because I think a lot of people are also controlled and influenced by TV. So if those people that make those decisions can influence it in a positive way, then it will also work for everybody else as well, and educate the wider public. And is it that one of the analogies I'm going to use is that, for example, guide dogs, on the guide dogs adverts, you always see the golden Labradors and the Andrex puppies. But whenever I'm out and about using my guide dog, people always say to me, oh, I never knew guide dogs were black, because I've got a black guide dog. But because the TV doesn't portray a black guide dog, people don't think that they have black guide dogs. And when I investigate this, I was told that the black guide dog doesn't make as good TV as the golden one, because of the way the imagery and the creativity of it. So I think the media can do more, and I think they should do more. Yeah.
I think we are heading in the right direction. I mean, I think that the best thing I can say on that is that I'm certainly noticed with my kids at school that certainly difference is being normalized a lot more than it was when I was a kid, and at school it's being normalized, and I think that's the really key thing, because I know that, for example, my youngest, who's now 8, I think about a year ago, there was a girl in his class who's only got one arm, and he was talking about her, and I said to him, "Oh, do you mean your friend that's got one arm?" He said, "Oh, has she? Oh, yes, she has." And then he's kind of like, you know, he just and it's been there's been no attention drawn, if you know what I mean, which is the important thing. Whereas I think back in the day, we would have had, no disrespect to any of my teachers back, well, they're probably all dead, but no disrespect, but we would have had it pointed out to us, if you know what I mean, and we would have had the difference pointed out. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there, really, about the TV show thing as well. It's just actually, why are we still making or trying to point out or put a label over the top of it, if you like? If you say, if this person's just, you know, Gerald is looking for a date, right? Then actually I think that normalizes it a lot better.
I think also like the TV has a massive part to play in role models. So because LGBT is a lot more sort of in the public domain, that made me feel more confident and comfortable to come out, I would say. So when I'm hearing stories of people like Gareth Thomas, famous rugby players, coming out, and other famous people that come out, you think, do you know what? It's okay to be gay. And I think that we need more of that around the disability space as well, to, you know, it's okay to be disabled, it's okay to be blind. And as someone that runs a company doing workplace assessments for employees with visual impairment and hearing loss, one of the big things we find on a regular basis is people struggle in silence at work. And they don't want to come out as visually impaired or hearing impaired or have hearing loss, because they think they're going to get sacked, or they think that the manager's going to look at them in a different way, or they're going to think that they're incompetent, or, you know, all of these types of things. So it relates not just from the sort of playground, but also to the workplace. And I think, you know, George has got a very interesting story about his own experience of coming out sort of in the workplace and struggling and fumbling around in the dark, really.
Tell us about fumbling around in the dark, George. We all want to hear that one.
It was just kind of like in schools, like what you were saying, Dan, in terms of people, some clients and things that you've had, and people saying that they're scared they're going to lose their jobs and things. But the sad thing is, there are kind of institutions out there where that would happen, or they would have managers that would feel, God, they can't possibly do the job now if they can't see very well, if they can't hear very well. There would still be those judgments out there, which for me was one of the reasons why it took me so long to come out as visually impaired. But I mean, now, just like I said, I feel so much different about everything now. But just going back to when I was working in school, so a school that I worked in recently, it was kind of, I knew that I was like, oh gosh, I really can't do this anymore. So I used to kind of I confided in my TA, and I explained to her that I can't see very well, and she was very supportive and helping me in the classroom. But it got to a point where I would refrain myself from leaving the classroom because I was scared of like bumping into things, or bumping into children, or having someone ask me to do something randomly that I wasn't able to do. Or so I would kind of always stay in my classroom, and it got to a point where even on my lunch break, I didn't want to leave the class because I didn't want to go into the staff rooms, just making a cup of tea or just anything like that. I would just find the whole situation really, really stressful. So then for me, that was when I felt like I needed to leave teaching. And it wasn't only until after I left that I spoke to kind of my manager, and then I explained why I'd left. And then after that, it was almost like, oh, okay, that's fine. I understand why you aren't coming back. It wasn't like potentially there could have been the support there, but I don't know whether there would have been, because automatically their assumption would have been, oh, well, he obviously can't teach now then. So that was it. That was it for me. And that's where I felt last July. So when I left, I thought, right, that's it. I'm drawing a line under that. But it's not only until after that, when I realized what support and services are out there, that I possibly could have stayed in that role. But just based on those experiences and that story I just told you, it wasn't an option for me then.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they struggle on, and they're not aware of what is available to them. And So sometimes it's for other people and managers to highlight there's a difficulty, for example, you know, and question as a HR manager or as a line manager, well, why is my colleague staying in the classroom at lunchtime? Because, you know, is that usual? Is that the norm? Why have you as a line manager not questioned that and gone, well, actually, this person may need additional support, or there may be something going on in their home life, or, you know, that type of thing. And I think it's not just for the individual to come out as visually impaired. It's also for the line manager to notice there's something going on that might be slightly different, but also having that culture as an organization to be, do you know what, it's okay if you need adjustments, this is what we can do. You know, telling the whole organization about workplace adjustments, because some people just sit in silence. Well, a lot of people, I would say, sit in silence, and they're not sure of what is available. And so it's really important to spread those messages across your organization and build that trust culture, and also that culture of, you know, you can come and speak to me if you've got any issue at all.
Yeah, and I think as well what you were saying, Dan, it's like employers have a lack of understanding and lack of knowledge, and that's not necessarily their fault. But
No.
I feel like there needs to be more of a universal kind of training and understanding and knowledge building for these kind of scenarios to kind of prevent them in the future. Because at the moment, it was something that I just didn't know I didn't even know where to start. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know what was out there. I just thought, gosh, as soon as I say anything, that's it, career over. Because that's all I've kind of been told. I'd never knew anything about what was out there. So I feel like if I did know that, then, like I said, my circumstances might be different. But yeah.
I want to ask a question about the word adjustments, actually, because it's a word that I've often struggled with, a little bit like assistive technology in a way, because actually I just think a lot of what we term as assistive technology is just great technology that just enables people to do stuff. So it's, you know, I just think it's just really good technology. But I've often thought about the word adjustment as well, and we use it because it is the term that everyone kind of understands about putting into place things to enable people. But I also think that it's almost got a negative connotation to it, because it sounds like there's something, when you adjust something, there's something that's on a norm, on a path, and you're having to turn it, twist it, change it, whatever, in order to enable or to fit something in which isn't on that normal path. Whereas actually the reality is that every single person within an organization needs things bespoking or twisting or turning or nudging or whatever to them to enable them to do something, right? So actually an organization will, for everybody, have adjustments in inverted commas going on. There's an element to it which it sounds like this is the special thing for the special people, if you know what I mean, within an organization. Do we just need to change again, in the same way that we were talking about, you know, normalizing? Do we just need to change the narrative and the language a little bit more around this whole area, and actually just get people to understand, do you know what, I want people in my business. And, you know, if I want George in my business, what does George need? You know, Deirdre over here needs this, Janet needs that, Derek needs this, George needs this. I don't, you know, now it's normal. Everything's normal. Yeah,
I would agree. I think we all, there's definitely, so, you know, so that's why sometimes it's called a workplace needs assessment, isn't it? Because it's looking at what are the needs of the individual that are needed. And it's interesting because in America they use workplace accommodations. The UK use more workplace adjustments, which it's very interesting what you're saying, actually. And I think everybody needs something. So it might be that, I don't know, Barbara needs some time off work to care for her dad, or Sandra needs some time off work because she's just had a bereavement in the family. So that's a need. So everybody has a need, and most people within an organization would have a need at one point in their career. So yeah, it should just be business as usual, and norm. It should just be built into the normality of business or managing people. But it is slightly something separate, and it's interesting because when somebody has a disability, especially visual impairment, they're generally sent to an occupational health doctor, and occupational health doctors are great, but they'll generally talk a lot about the medical diagnosis and the condition and management and all of these type of things, and they might look at medical retirement and other things. But actually, a lot of the people who I see, they don't necessarily need to see a doctor. They just need to look at what workplace needs adjustments do they need? What do they need? And sometimes they're taken down the wrong route, so they end up with occupational health rather than workplace adjustments. And so sometimes I'm seeing that some people are signed off or they're medically retired, and there's actually no need for it either. So that's an interesting conundrum as well.
Yeah, just kind of off the back of that, I was just kind of thinking then, I was like, oh, it's actually very similar to kind of in teaching, for example. If you have a piece of work that you're preparing for a group of children, there's so many children in that class that have different needs. Therefore, you can't just give one piece of learning to 30 kids. It has to be adapted and adjusted and amended for specific groups of children, depending on their abilities. So I think it's the same thing, but I was trained within that profession. I was trained and I learned how to do that. So I think that within like working organizations, like it's almost like people don't have that understanding, or like they think, oh my goodness, the word adjustments, what does that, as an employer, what have I got to do? Because it automatically makes you think, oh, they've got to make all these adjustments for somebody. It's going to be a really long, drawn out process for them. So therefore, it's always got these negative connotations towards it. Whereas I think that if they had that understanding and kind of training and knowledge on making those adjustments, they might be mild adjustments, or what they call reasonable adjustments, don't they, in the workplace. But I think that if they had that knowledge and understanding there, then it would be really kind of, it wouldn't be a thing. It would just be automatic. And like you said, what does George need? What does Dan need? What does this person need? It's not about needing specific adjustments because of their disability. Because like you said, everybody is going to be making adjustments, whether it be adjusting the height of their office chair or like the brightness on their monitor. There's going to be so many adjustments that everybody will do. But it's about having that knowledge and understanding as an employer on how to kind of facilitate that within the workplace.
One thing I want to come back to is just ask George, sort of, why didn't you feel, because you obviously, so you mentioned before that you were doing some supply teaching as well. So at what point why didn't you feel comfortable to tell or to come out to your employer about your visual impairment?
Because I always felt that people would have this negative judgment, or, well, if you can't see, then how can you possibly teach? Or how are you going to be able to perform daily tasks such as reading a book to children or marking my child's learning? And obviously, I'm not a parent, but I can imagine from a parent's perspective that you obviously want the best for your child, and you want your child to be able to have access to kind of being read to, making sure that the marking they're receiving is kind of at high quality, so they know what areas they need to improve on. And as a teacher, I felt like that was my role, and I wasn't able to kind of fulfill those roles at the highest standard that I would want to. So therefore, I felt like if I were to tell someone in my workplace about it, then they would automatically think, oh, well, he can't do it anymore then. And it would then kind of, I would have to leave the role. So I just had to wait until I was kind of comfortable enough to come to terms with it myself before I could even think about telling anybody else.
So how did you manage that? Did you put any techniques in place or any sort of strategies?
I just relied on my TA heavily. I literally used to make excuses or kind of do really, really plan really far in advance. I remember a specific situation. So doing the register in the morning, it would be like on the computer, it's so small, like the font's tiny and you couldn't adapt it. And I remember I used to kind of think of like these techniques that I could do. So one would be I would take a picture of the list on my phone, and then I would kind of memorize where it is and then look. So I'd read the name and then I'd say the name out loud, and then I'd be able to kind of do it like that. But it would take me forever. And being able to have to like do the lunch register, I just think of these techniques and strategies that I would put in place to kind of help me. But even then I was like, my God, this is like impossible now. So that's when I kind of felt like I needed to say something. But yeah, it was really hard.
One of the narratives that is beginning to be talked about within sort of leadership and company culture is the permission to fail, and being more open about the permission to fail. But beyond that, should we be giving people more permission on a day-to-day basis just to say, this is horrible? You know, this is currently, this is horrible for me. So not just, you know, permission to fail as an organization and then learn from that, but within that at individual level, really being able to be honest in whichever situation you find yourself, without fear of, you know, this is going to lead to me losing my job or being put out to pasture by the organisation with a paycheck, of course. You know, even though that's not going to do my mental health any good for the next 30 years as I sit at home and, you know, open my yogurt. But should we be saying, you know, giving people much more permission to actually say, this is horrible for me at the moment, and actually, you know, this is what my world looks like. And because it seems to me there is a problem there still in terms of, George, you recognise that this was going wrong, but you kept it to yourself because and
I think it stems from leadership.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it stems from the top, doesn't it? So if I were in a working environment where I felt comfortable to say something, then maybe I would have said something. But I didn't have that kind of mentality of, oh yeah, they if I said something, they'd be fine with it. I have the complete opposite, because I didn't have that comfort, or I wasn't told that. I think that within, for example, in a staff meeting, as a leader, you should automatically just say, right, obviously I'm always here, my door's always open. If there's any concerns or anything, like, we can support you with whatever needs that you have, as just generally, not thinking about disabilities specifically, but it could be to do with anything. But
well, I'm going to question that, actually, George. I'm going to question that, because I think some people do that, but I think they do it because they know that as semantics that's the right thing to say. I wonder whether it's enough to just stand there and say, well, my door's always open, you know, you can come and talk to me, or is it actually about leaders beginning to be honest themselves and say, do you know what, I did rubbish at that. I was dreadful at, you know, I'm behind with my marking this month, or I'm behind with this, or I'm not doing very well at this at the moment, and being honest about their failings themselves, because that's when I think it starts to open up a culture where you can then say, yeah, so am I'm struggling with this.
Yeah. And no one's perfect. Everybody's got their faults and failings and things they struggle with. But
because,
like you said,
if you think that the management are succeeding, but the management are saying, oh, but the door's open, you still probably aren't going to say anything, because you think,
you're not going to want to go in there and speak and trying to ruin this whole perfect image of whatever they've got going on, and then go in and be like, boom, I can't see.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think it's also about the place it's coming from, because you can say something and you can also tell if it's coming from a good place or a textbook place, you know. So I think it's partly that as well, and I would just agree with what you've both sort of said. But one of the things I'm also curious to know is, did you ever were you sort of educated about occupational health or reasonable adjustments, or did you know anything about, or did you not think to go to HR or anything like that? And also the other question I've got is, did you ever have supervision with your line manager?
So your first question, I mean, in terms of my understanding, I didn't know anything about occupational health. I didn't know anything about I could have reached out to HR, but then again, like, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that without even consulting my employer first, or like confiding in my employer first before going straight to HR. But if in terms of occupational health, if I'd known about it, I'll give you an example. So when I left my role last year with the supply agency that I was working for, they're the first people that I told. And I told them, and they didn't respond. So I emailed them and I just said, right, I can't do this job anymore for this reason, blah, 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 blah. And then I didn't get a response. So for me, that was then a confirmation that, okay, I obviously can't do this job then. Because if they'd known about kind of what resources were out there or what services I could work with in order to stay in that role, then they surely would have told me. But they obviously didn't know anything about it either. So and it was almost a bit like, oh gosh, this is a bit of a touchy territory. We will just ignore that and not reply. And then it was only when I then got really frustrated and I contacted their HR about kind of the whole way that it was dealt with. And then they actually phoned me to apologize for the way that they dealt with it, because I felt like they hadn't taken anything into consideration or even gave me any options. But what was your second question? Sorry.
And no, I think you've answered supervision. You met that supervision.
Oh yeah.
Did you ever have supervision?
No, not really. And again, because I was working for a supply agency, who am I? Just a supply teacher. Yeah. They're not going to want to speak to me. They're not bothered. I go in there, I teach, and I go home. And then there was no kind of support network there. My ultimate aim was actually to supply for a bit and then secure a permanent role within the school. But in my last placement, I was there for a term, so I did actually work there for about 15 weeks. But even then, there was no real kind of supervision, or not that I felt comfortable to go to anyway.
Yeah,
I suppose supply team. It's interesting because one thing I've just learned then was, if you're not actually employed as the sort of standard employment, then who does the workplace adjustments fall upon? Is it the supply agency or who? Because that must be an interesting situation, because you're obviously on PAYE rather than self-employed, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'd work for the agent. So this is where it's like you work for the agency, but if I would need reasonable adjustments within kind of tech being one of the main things, then I would either have to have a support worker full time, because going into different classrooms all the time, having to navigate around different schools, find my way around, use computers that I'm not familiar with. It was just kind of impossible, really.
Yeah, and I think also, that's a mass, because a lot of people they're in the same job, they stay in the same job and struggle. But you've sort of taken it to the next level where you've gone supply teacher. I'm going to go to different schools, different environments, new processes, new computers, and you've not got the technology to help you. I can imagine that must have been a massive struggle, but also a massive strain upon your mental health as well.
Oh, horrendous. And I really, towards the end, I was like, it was just painful every single day, kind of going into work and thinking, oh gosh, like, even to the point of sometimes you'd be moved from different classes. So one day I had to teach 3 different classes in a day, And then that would randomly change. And then you don't know any of the children's names. I can't barely see them across the classroom. I don't know what children are putting their hands up to answer questions. The TAs that doesn't know me is going, oh, can you read this story to them? And I'm like, oh, I'm making up excuses. No, sorry, I've got a migraine. I can't do that today. And then it literally just became ridiculous. And it became a bit of a joke in my head. And then I thought, oh my God, I can't actually do it. What is the point? It's just sending me loopy.
I'm gonna say a little thing in there, which is about what we need actually there is we do need more progressive agencies, because I've been working doing some stuff with one particular agency, and I know that they're really focused on this, because one of the things they've done, for example, is they've started provision of a mental health and well-being app to and the support services that come with that app to their workers who are on temporary contracts, because they've recognized that those people fall down a gap of provision which wouldn't be there. But what they've noticed is that actually they're keeping those people in work better by giving them those provisions. So it actually will help agencies to do this stuff, provide better quality services to the people that they're servicing into. But it needs people to be a bit more forward thinking about it, because otherwise there are a lot of people out there who are not on the payroll per se with an organization, and therefore will miss the gap, so that's a whole interesting area really.
And I think it's hard for agencies, because if an agency were to have, for example, in my situation, if they were to have an employee who's fully sighted, requires no reasonable adjustments, can just drive to any school, and there's me who needs these adjustments. I'm restricted to what schools I can go to because I can't drive there. I can only walk to, say, 2 schools in my local area, for example. Then the agency is going to take privilege or pride, like look after this other person more because they're making them more money. So for me, I just felt like I didn't want to disclose that information to them because it just wouldn't work in my favor at all.
Well, I think actually you probably opened a hornet's nest by saying that, and it'd be interesting to hear the comments and things from people within the sector, because actually the provision should be there to support them in supporting you. And I don't, because otherwise that is discriminatory to say, oh, I'm going to pick this person over that person because that person has a disability. So
I'm not saying that they would, but just from my experience.
Oh, I think you're being open and honest by saying what you're saying, but I think it'd be interesting to hear what comments come back from when people listen to this within the sector, to hear actually maybe where people are getting it right and where people aren't getting it right. So and I'm sure that there's differential out there. I just want to end today. It's been great conversation, both of you. Thank you very much. What's the worst thing that anybody's ever said to you in terms of coming out?
Oh, I would have never have guessed. Or you don't look blind.
I don't actually know, to be quite honest.
No,
I haven't really. I've been lucky enough to not have, because I've only recently, literally within the last 6 months, started to come to terms with kind of telling people that I'm visually impaired. I haven't yet. I'm sure I will in the future come across any kind of horrendous comments.
Well, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much to both of you for bearing all, as it were. I hope this sparks some conversation amongst people listening.
And I just want to say, be loud and proud about your sexuality, be loud and proud about your disability, and don't let nobody ever stop you from being yourself. And then I just want to do, I'm coming out. I want the world to know. Got to let you go. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, George, and thank you, Graham. You've been listening to Visualize Training and Consultancies podcast.